Got everybody in and connected to audio. So good evening, everyone. My name is Ginny. I'm with Anderson's Bookshop, and I'd like to welcome you to this virtual author event tonight with Rich Cohen in conversation with Josh Karp. We're really glad to have you all with us tonight. Thanks for taking the time to keep your eyes on yet another screen to talk books with us tonight. Anderson's Bookshop, for those of you who aren't familiar with us, is an independent bookstore. We've been owned and run by the Anderson family for going on 6 generations now. So your support is very personal and appreciated by us. We'd like to take a minute to say thank you for that. It allows us to, your being here and your purchase of books from our store helps us to continue doing these events. And normally, if we would be in person, we'd be doing this in the store along with almost 400 a year that we normally do. And like I say, your support here means we can continue to do this both virtually until we can be back together again in person, and then back in person as soon as we can. We don't know when that's going to be, but we're excited for it, whatever it is. Hopefully this will keep us all tied over until that time, but we have lots of other virtual events coming up, something for every taste, every age, every interest. Fiction, nonfiction, all kinds of great things coming in. Mitchell Weiss, we've got working on we've got something with Charles Finch, who's a fantastic novelist, and some other great authors coming up the next couple of months that we haven't even announced yet. But I work in the basement normally of the bookstore in Anderson, so I sit down there and book things when I can. So hopefully we'll see you again at another one in the future for something else that piques your interest. But tonight, we're happy to welcome back to Anderson's, because we've had you in our store before, Rich Cohen, who is a contributing editor at Vanity Fair and Rolling Stone, a New York Times bestselling author of books such as Israel is Real, Tough Jews, and the widely acclaimed memoir Sweet and Low. His work has appeared in The New Yorker, Harper's Magazine, and Best American Essays. He lives in Connecticut with his family. And we are joined tonight by Josh Karp, a journalist and writer who teaches at Northwestern. His first book, A Futile and Stupid Gesture, won Best Biography of 2006 at both the Independent Publisher Book Awards and the Midwest Book Awards. It was adapted into a Netflix film of the same name. He's also the author of several other books, and his writing has also appeared in Salon, The Atlantic, and Newsweek, among others. So welcome to both of you. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. We're excited to talk about some Pee Wee hockey here.
All right.
Thank you. So should I just get started?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So why don't we start by you telling everybody why or how you came to decide to write a book about your son and Pee Wee hockey and the experience of being a Pee Wee hockey parent.
Well, I grew up playing hockey in Deerfield, and mostly in Deerfield. And I was, very into hockey, watching hockey, playing hockey. And then I went off and I moved to New York, and I had a family, and I moved out to Connecticut. And suddenly it was like, I thought I was finished with hockey in a way, but I realized just by chance that my new house was like a 1/10 of a mile from a hockey rink. That's like a completely vintage hockey rink from like the 1970s. And I went there with my son, and he got into it, and he ultimately started playing travel hockey. And the funny thing is, my brother's kids played pretty high level youth hockey and college hockey. And I always thought my brother was acting kind of like an idiot. Like he was getting so into it, wasting so much of his life. And then quickly I realized I was acting like a bigger idiot than my brother had ever been. I completely lost control of myself. I was like, make fun of these crazy parents. I was like the craziest parents. My father has a saying, which I've tried to live by, which is the key to happiness is to care, but not that much. And I found myself violating that rule over and over and over again. And I felt kind of both at sea and fascinated by like how that game that was being played then compared to what it was like when we were kids, and what the parents were like and what my generation was like as hockey parents. And when that usually happens to me, usually started with me kind of wanting a Zaggett's guide for Connecticut and New England area hockey rinks. Like, where is it safe to drink coffee? Like, you don't want to drink coffee at the Wonderland in Stamford or in Bridgeport. And, where are you going to need like 5 layers of clothes? The Gunnery private school in Washington, Connecticut. And it turned into like me wanting a guide for the whole youth hockey life. And I went looking for it, and it didn't exist. And it seemed like I would write it. And in writing it, maybe I could like get a hold of my own addiction with youth hockey and problem and understand it. And hopefully my belief is if I'm feeling it, a lot of other people have to be feeling it. And I could serve the same service to every other hockey parent or sports parent in the world that I could serve to myself.
Well, speaking of your Zaggett's guide, I was years ago in Peoria at a rink, and there was a sign over the urinal advertising their south of the border taco hot dog. What is the weirdest? That's the weirdest thing I've seen in my travels. What's the weirdest thing in if you were making your Zagat's guide, what's the weirdest thing you've seen in your hockey travels?
Well, I'll tell you one thing is you could just do a whole book on the bathrooms of the ice rinks, you know. Well, what we have here in Connecticut that's really special, I think, is that we play sometimes where Yale plays its hockey games, which they call the Whale. Do you know that rink?
Yeah.
It's designed by Eros Saarinen. I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce his name, but he's the guy who designed the St. Louis Arch and that really cool table that we all have in our kitchen. And he has this unbelievably cool ice rink. And you realize that it is like the rinks are really, some of the vintage rinks are really, really cool. I mean, my brother started playing hockey in Deerfield before they had a bubble. It was an outdoor rink. They
Right.
put the bubble on, and it was an old-fashioned bubble, the kind that they fixed the design. There was no sections, it was just solid, and it was patched up. And during a game, there was a big windstorm and it blew off. And a bunch of parents got in their cars and chased it. The story is all the way to Indiana because it cost like $35,000 and they wanted to salvage it. And by the time they got it, it had been ripped to shreds. So there is and I think the Deerfield bubble now is in Minnesota, still being used by a college team for a practice rink. So there is this kind of thing where you see a lot of things and a lot of different kinds of rinks, and the personalities of the team kind of come from the rinks. The rink we have here in my town was an outdoor rink, and at first they just put a roof on it. And I don't know if you ever played in one of those rinks that has a roof but no sides, but if it warms up, they get covered with this very dense fog. It's like the Fog Bowl where the Bears play the Philadelphia Eagles. It's crazy. And then eventually they put the sides in it, and it's the classic rink where the smell of the locker room is unbelievably bad. It's horrible, you know, and it's just hockey. And when you get back there after not being there for many, many years, it feels like home. It's a really good feeling to walk into a hockey rink. And that's something you miss a little bit during the pandemic, which is those hockey rinks and how kind of comforting those places are.
Sure. Well, talk about how, you know, because you grew up playing hockey at a very different time. Talk a little bit about the difference between playing youth hockey then and playing youth hockey now, and the youth hockey parents then versus youth hockey parents now.
Well, I'll start by now, which is the organization we play in has 4 travel teams, and everybody knows the levels. And it's a AA team, an A team, an A1 team, and a B team. And the team your kid makes tends to determine your social status as a parent. So if your kid is a AA kid and doesn't make it because he has a bad tryout or something, and he gets put down to the A team, it's like having to move tables in the lunchroom in junior high school. It's very, very traumatic. I've seen people cry, you know, and your kid, and we all like to say it doesn't matter to us, but we're human and we're social animals, and it does. And when your kid does something well and everybody sees it, you feel better, as if people treat you better, you know. And these things, what teams they make, we tell us it's sort of this idea of getting on the best team and playing in college, which almost none of them are going to do. But it's really about us now and how we feel about ourselves right now and how we're treated right now. And everything, it's like where your kid goes to college, where your kid and what team they're on, all these things. And they all seem very, very important, much more important than when I was growing up. And it really didn't seem to matter. Hockey was, for me, a perfect sport. And my brother, because our parents grew up in Brooklyn. My father in Bensonhurst, my mother in Flatbush. My father played basketball. He was a basketball coach. He knew nothing about hockey. He couldn't tell me anything. And it was perfect. I would say this, but it's true, which is in my whole entire time playing hockey, he came to 2 games and he only yelled one thing from the stands, and he yelled it twice, which was when I was laid out and thought I was going to die. I heard his voice yell, "Get up, you're not hurt." And that was the extent of his hockey involvement. And mostly they would just drop us off, pick us up, and they would just say, "How'd it go? Did you have fun?" That was it. They didn't care. As long as we didn't get hurt and they didn't have to take us to the emergency room, which sometimes they didn't care. So, you know, and it just didn't matter. And the idea was, you know, my father was like, he was too busy earning a living, working, to be involved in our hockey career. And as a result, it was something we did on our own. And now I just have this memory of when my older son was playing and he forgot something and I had to stick my head in the locker room to give him his tape, and every parent from that team was in that locker room. And I was like, this is insane. It's like each kid has a private coach, their parent.
Right.
And each parent is telling them what to do. And you have the kid telling them what to do, but then you have the coach telling them what to do. And when that happens, and that was an extreme example, but it was happening, the team just can't, gel.
Right.
And doesn't become a team. So I think and one more thing which you mentioned, which was in Glencoe, we had a house league that played at Watts outdoor rink. And it was a really good house league. And some of the best kids around played in that house league simply because their parents weren't going to play for travel hockey and they didn't have time. Or maybe they had a lot of kids, and if they had one play, they all had to play and it was too much money. So what team you're on did not necessarily mean, and no one thought it meant how good of a player you were. And one thing I will say with my son, which I bristled at, was I was giving a ride to another kid on his team. And at this point, he was on the A team, which he is in the book. And the kid said, every kid on the AA team is better than every one of us. And I was like, I hated that. It's not true. Right. And it's just that idea that there's this incredibly efficient system, choosing the winners from the losers in this thing is just drove me nuts.
It's funny. I mean, about the status, one of my kids was playing baseball in his first year. He took another kid's place on the A team, and the next year my son wound up on the B team, and the dad of the kids whose place he took sat down next to me and said, I experienced some real schadenfreude when your son got cut back down to the B team with my and I was like, this is what happened. This is like the world, that did not, my parents wouldn't have known if I was on an A team, a B team, or what I was doing. And now, but there's that status, he was like, well, now we're equals again.
It's also a good description, a good, explanation of what's excellent about the phrase, honesty is the best policy. Not true. Actually, should have just shut up and said.
Never. But you find, have you found that there's a lot of honesty that goes on among hockey parents that you might not have in the real world? Like the people are saying things.
What amazed me was it's like a social clique. And I just remember walking into the rink and there's a group of parents standing in a big circle, all facing in like a giant football huddle. I call that the holy hockey circle. And you're like in that circle or you're not in that circle. And then you think, I don't want to be involved in this. This is the sick thing, man. You think, I don't want to be involved in this. I have my own life and I don't want to whatever. And a couple things happen. One is you think if you're involved, your kid gets treated better. And I don't know if it's true or not, but it feels that way. It feels like you have to do your part. And then also, if it's travel hockey, they play sometimes up to 50 to 80 games a year, which is insane. Right. That's an NHL season. Okay. And you're going to be with these other parents more than you've been with anybody since college. Okay. So you got to make friends with them or you're just going to live a lonely, sad existence, So, and a lot of them I am very good friends with and have remained friends with. But I do find that the socialness of it, you asked if people are honest. I think that people are honest and they're not, and when you think something is bad happening to your kid, for example, no other parent will admit it or talk about it, and so you kind of feel like, there's a little bit like, am I going crazy? Is this not happening? Like, because I don't trust my own, sense of what's going on, because another thing my father said is believing is seeing. So if you believe your kid is getting shafted, or if you believe your kid is great, your kid will look great. And one thing I found is that there's basically two kinds of parents. And this is where it's not just about hockey, it's about being a parent. There are the people that think their kids can do no wrong and is perfect and is the greatest. And then parents that think their kids can do no right and is embarrassment, and we've both seen both kind of parents, when the truth is almost always your kid's in the middle. And they'll explain why. I'm talking about 13-year-olds all on the same team, why this kid has to get more ice time, or this kid blah, 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 blah. And the fact is the difference in skill level between most of these kids is very, very marginal, with a few outstanding players and a few kids maybe that haven't developed as much. Mostly they're all around the same level. So when the parents get in the car and drive 6 hours here, maybe to Maine for a game, and their kid is sitting on the bench the whole game, because it's something that the parent doesn't see and doesn't understand, they go nuts, and then the coach has to deal with them. And you try to explain to the coach, look, this is a nice guy and a good guy and a guy you normally like, but you got him. It's like the equivalent of somebody that's had 3 shots of Jack Daniels and he's pissed off and you're talking to him. It's not really how he is. And that's why they instituted the 24-hour rule, which is you're not allowed to talk to the coach about your kid's game for 24 hours. And I think that would be, by the way, a great policy for the whole country. Imagine if nobody could put anything on social media or, Twitter for 24 hours after they had the opinion. Our whole problem would be solved.
No, it's funny because you hear people, on the news, and they'll be hysterical about something
right
immediately after it happens, and then 2 days later it's not even, it's not happening anymore. But I like the idea of instituting the 24-hour.
There was a phrase I always think of, which was E.B. White was criticizing some polls that have been taken, and this is the beginning of real modern polling, and he said, you can take a nation's pulse, but you can't be sure that nation hasn't just run up a flight of stairs. And it's always taking the nation's pulse just after it's run up a flight of stairs. And it's the same with how you are after a hockey game. And the thing that's different about youth hockey, another reason I thought this would be a great book, is I just didn't want to be like a book about hockey parents. I want it to be a great sports book.
Right.
And, I thought at the core of it, it's a story of a team that comes together, gels, and has this incredible experience and incredible season and be exciting in and of itself. And I've written a book about the Bears, and I've written a book about the Cubs, and I really wanted to write a hockey book because I consider that my sport. And I thought, but for a hockey book, I don't want to write about the Blackhawks. I want to write about youth hockey because that's the purest version of the sport.
Sure.
Kids playing just because they love playing. And the parents are what the parents are. And, because if you go, this, your kids play baseball. And if you watch 10-year-olds play baseball, it's not a lot like the baseball you're going to see on television. I mean, it's a different sport. Completely. If you watch them play basketball, different sport, football, different sport, but hockey's pretty much hockey. And you can go to a squirt. I've been at tournaments where I'm killing time between games and I'll watch random squirts and I get into it.
Yeah.
It gets exciting. You start to identify players, kids who can do stuff. You're watching the scoreboard, and that's another reason why I thought it'd be a great thing to write about, because the games themselves are very exciting.
Well, as a parent, what have you gotten out of the experience? Obviously spending time with your son, but what do you see your son getting out of the experience, and what are you getting out of the experience that's positive?
I know for him, first of all, it's just a great exercise,
right?
And there's nothing like it, and it's good for his body and good for his mind and good for stress. I think it's a great example of learning how to win and lose, and how to deal with that, how to deal with disappointment, and how to be part of a team, and what it takes to be a good team, which is sometimes not getting what you want, sublimating your talent. He's really good at the dirty work, digging the puck out of corners, which you never get credit for. There's no statistic for it. But if you know hockey, without that player, you cannot win. You need the guy that goes, it's like Dennis Rodman with the rebounds. You need somebody that goes into the corners and digs the puck out and gets pummeled a little bit. And he likes that, and all that stuff and when a kid gets knocked down and hurt, and they have this thing now where they all take a knee,
Right.
But supporting the other teammates and sublimating your own talent for the team. And then the thing I always loved about hockey, I think we talked about it before, is from the time I was a kid all the way up to watching the NHL, is the handshake, which they don't have now, sadly, because of COVID, but the handshake at the end of the game, which is this, to me, it always seemed kind of like a holy thing as a kid, because it sort of says, all right, we hated each other for 45 minutes. We were trying to beat each other, but that's over now. And we accept the outcome. We won or we lost. And we realize that maybe we won today, but we play again tomorrow, we'll lose, and there's more we have in common as hockey players than that ever separates us as opponents. And I know he got all of that from hockey. What I got from it is an incredibly entertaining way to spend the winter, a way to exercise my emotions, a way to feel like I was having an effect on his life and his hockey skill, which I probably wasn't, a huge amount of time with him, an experience of very mediocre hotels around the country. If you asked him the best thing about playing hockey, he'd say the Holiday Inn breakfast buffet, and there's a hot tub in Lake Placid where I saw so many kids in that hot tub. If you wanted to fit a pencil in that hot tub, you couldn't fit it in. I mean, I've never seen anything jammed up with bodies like that. So for them, that's the fun thing, man. It's being in the hotel with all these other kids. And I do feel like, I'm a writer like you, so I don't go into an office, and I'm alone a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And it's been like, being a wick dipped into wax, but the wax is what's going on with my country, my contemporaries, my generation right now. And I saw really good things and not so good things.
Yeah, it's a weird, I think, microcosm, right? Of like a large, like a heightened version, though given the way the world is right now, maybe not so heightened, but it's like a heightened version of real life, right? Because you have all of
Yeah.
the same. Go ahead.
Everything that's bad and unfair and wrong that's going on in the country is going on in the hockey rink. Everything that's good and right is going on there too. It is a microcosm. And though it's always been considered a kind of elite sport, there's been this huge boom in hockey because people are nervous about letting their kids play football. And a lot of those people have gotten their kids into hockey. And so you have all these new parents, basically new to hockey, I mean. And you have this on our team, at least, and I'm sure it's the same there. We're kind of in a town that's between very wealthy towns and not wealthy towns. We're in the middle.
Right.
And we draw from both. So you get, this huge socioeconomic cross section. That's why I started the book with the parking lot, because you can see it in the different cars of very rich people who, this is just a drop in a bucket. It's a fun thing for their kids to do. The money doesn't mean anything. And other people coming from towns in northern Connecticut who are driving an hour to play in this program, who, they're scraping together the money, and it's like a real tough to play the game. And you put them all together and you get to see what's going on in the country, I felt like.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it is interesting seeing that, and I think it's good for the kids too, to be in places that are not exactly like where they're from. I mean,
and they travel and they play in really different places,
Yeah, and they see kids who are not from, who are either, from a more affluent background, a working class background, whatever the difference is. But, I mean, I don't know about you, but I think give them an appreciation and an understanding of things that they just wouldn't see, because we all are so insular, especially, right now, but like everybody's so stuck in their community.
Right. I remember, you just remind me of this, a stupid story, but when I was a kid, my brother they used to do where you go in a hockey tournament, you stay with another family. Remember that?
Uh-huh.
They'd put you up for 2 nights, the tournament. And these kids came from Canada and stayed at our house, and they were going on and on about how big our house was. And it really was just a regular house in Glencoe. And we were sort of amazed by that. And then my brother went down to St. Louis and stayed at some kid's house, and he came back going on and on about how big their house was, about how our house was a joke. Our house could fit in their garage. And it was like, you see that where you are, which is there's people above you, there's people below you. And that's another great thing about hockey, which is recently this year, he's on a AA team now. They played a AAA team that just beat the crap out of him, and because physically they just beat him up. And it was like, you realize when you play hockey that no matter how good you are, there's somebody that's better than you. And no matter how big you are, there's somebody that's bigger than you. And, it kind of teaches you kind of a humility about another thing my dad always said, you might be the Jack of Hearts, but the Ace of Spades is somewhere in the deck and it's going to come up, and that's kind of, so I think all that's really, really fun and really, really good. And, the thing that drove me nuts about it was the same thing that drove me nuts about America, which is it does become kind of a technocratic state where everything is dependent on these algorithms. And these tryouts are very dependent on measuring seemingly objectively certain particular skills. And you see it even in the NFL combine. So you get on the top teams, you get players that maybe are the most precise or fanciest skaters.
Right.
Okay, but they're not the best hockey players necessarily, because the thing that makes a kid a great hockey player or an adult, those are often intangible things that there's no way to measure for. So They get lost, and it's like untapped value. And I'll give you an example, like Phil Esposito is not like a good skater if you go back and watch him.
Right.
But he's one of the greatest goal scorers who ever lived,
Right. Yeah, no, it's fun. I remember talking to one of my son's coaches when he was maybe 12, And I said, well, I don't know how long he'll play. And he's like, oh, he'll play in high school. And I was like, why? And he's like, because he's incredibly coachable
Yeah.
and listens. And I was like, it never occurred to me that was
Yeah.
something that anybody would notice or that would be valuable.
Right.
He's like, trust me. He's like, as they get older, the better, not necessarily being the better skater is
And all
always
this stuff, all the really fancy skating stuff as you get older doesn't work anymore because you're
right.
against kids who are just as good. So that's when you have to start to learn to pass and to play like a team. And all that depends on learning from the coach. And some
Right.
kids just can never make that leap because they can't listen to the coach. And, I always told, because I grew late, my son grew late. And I go, if you stay with hockey, that's going to be to your advantage because you're having to learn how to beat kids who are bigger and stronger than you, and you're going to grow.
Right.
And then
Right.
you'll be able to play like a you'll remember all that stuff. Like the biggest thing for me, because when we played, there was checking all along. And the biggest,
Right.
the thing I think they missed by not checking, it's not hitting. It's like when I was small and I learned how to not get hit. I don't think I got hit once or twice the whole time. I never got hit, because for survival, I always learned to step out of the way or move out of the way at the last minute and, see what was going on. And, I think that's true. And the other thing is, in addition to being coachable, the thing is like, who really loves it?
Right.
Because some of these kids that are really good, they don't really like it. And their parents are making them do it. And we have kids here, and I'm sure there, who play, and there's a real arms race to it to get your kid better. They have their kid play hockey basically all summer.
Right.
And we go away in the summer. He plays baseball, or we go away. We go to Maine, and a totally different life. And we get back, and there are kids he left at the rink in April, and they're still there. Now it's the end of August. And it's that feeling like where you leave the office at 6 and you come the next morning and there's a guy that's clearly been there all night. And he looks like garbage. You're like, you've been here the whole time? And they think their kid's going to make this jump, but it's actually not what happens, which is the kid is so sick of it and so ground down that they start to drag and not love it, and they don't want to play anymore.
That's my least favorite thing, is seeing like a 12-year-old who looks like they're 35 in their demeanor. Like
Yeah.
come into tryouts and they're just like, it's like they're an accountant at tax season, and it's just they're destroyed.
I know. By the time they get to the tryout, although we have tryouts in the spring, so by the time they get there for the beginning of the year, it's like they're done, man. They're exhausted. They need a vacation, and the kids who've not played come out with this kind of jump.
Right.
Because they're just raring to go and they've been thinking about it and they're excited about it. And these other things, I always believe, and maybe just because I want to, that when you play baseball, let's say, or whatever you play, you go sailing, all those things help your hockey,
Right.
It just teaches you certain kind of discipline, certain kind of hand-eye coordination, different kind of teamwork. It just helps you. I mean, the great thing about baseball is it's kind of boring. So you have to really develop a kind of concentration, whereas hockey's like constant action.
Right.
And, the concentration pays off in hockey too. So it's like the kids who play all year, it's like it's too clever for your own good.
Yeah, no, and plus it's crazy. And I mean, like, going back to comparing it to when we were kids, not just a couple of old men here for a second. I mean, there was not a single parent I can remember from growing up who would have been like, that's it, my kid, I'm paying for my kid to go to 3 different hockey camps, he's going to skate. They would have been like, you start playing hockey when it snows.
Right.
And the rink freezes. And you stop when it's over and you move on.
Right. And that phrase, like, I'm hanging them up, that was literal. I took my skates off and I hung them up in the garage, where when I outgrew them, they remained hanging up for 20 to 30 years, So it's just, but part of it too is I think that, we had like in Glencoe, they froze the big park, and and they'd have like 6, 7, 8 games going on at once. And on the weekend, you could play hockey all day. And now they don't have that kind of freedom, that kind of ice time.
Right.
They're trying to make up for it, kind of, because they don't skate as much.
Right. Well, that was the rink in Glencoe. I mean, the one thing I remember is, of all the sports, when I was growing up, that was actually the sport everybody played. Because we had to outdoor rink. Kids who didn't play baseball or soccer, or basketball, or football, everybody played hockey, at least for a couple of years. It was like
well, what else were you going to do in the winter? I mean, they hadn't built the mall yet. They hadn't built Northbrook Court yet. That was our
Right.
mall. And Deerbrook Mall, I think, was just being built. So I remember my brother played, and my parents would drop my brother off, and they just dropped me off with him because it was like free babysitting, you know? So
Right.
I would just go with the other little brothers, go running around under the bleachers and stuff. And then I wanted to skate. So my story is when I was about, well, hockey's mixed up with a couple very, very traumatic events in my life. The first is it's a joke in my family, when I got my first pair of skates, you know what size they were?
What?
00 narrow. That was the size. 00 narrow. It's like a Zen cone. That doesn't exist. Okay, but they were white because they were only
You
figure
had no
skates. So
feet. They were just
what?
there were you
Yeah,
had
well,
no feet that met. You just
yeah, well, yeah, they were white figure. They were like white skates, which bothered me because that white skates meant figure skates,
Right.
which was like a girl. I didn't want that. And finally, my father said, "Fine, I'll paint them black." So he got a thing of black because he's lazy. He was sitting there watching television. I swear to God, I think it was the Watergate hearings. Okay. And he was sitting there watching television and painting my skates black. And I got all excited and I bumped into the table and knocked the paint off, and it spilled into the white shag carpet. There was a big black stain on the white. It's the maddest I'd ever seen my father. And it was like very traumatic. And then I got in those skates and I couldn't get off my ankles. They probably had no support at all. And I couldn't get it. But I had this huge fear that my brother knew about the Zamboni. I had this vision that I was going to be killed by the Zamboni, run over and killed. Zamboni scared the hell out of me. And my brother knew the guy in Deerfield who drove the Zamboni. And no, actually, I think this actually happened in Highland Park at Centennial. He got the guy to come out and chase me with the Zamboni. And I got so scared that I went from can't get up off his ankles to the fastest skater anybody had ever seen. So that's my childhood nickname was Rocket because of that incident, and because they're like, look at that kid, he's a rocket. And because of that, you know, so for me, hockey's always mixed in with this fear of punishment and death. It was always the tension of the game. But for my son, it's just pure pleasure and joy because he just started playing with his friends.
What's your favorite moment from a game or from, you know, being around the locker room or being around the parents? You know, if there's like one moment that really signifies the best part of youth hockey.
Okay, there is an actual moment, and I'm going to tell you, but it's going to sound like bragging about my kid, but I got to tell it, which is my father was in town and he wanted to go to the game. So my son is nervous because, you know, grandpa's going to watch him play and he wants to play well. And he's really nervous about it. And I said, that's what you're nervous about? I'm like, listen, he's basically blind and he can't hear anything. He's not going to see you. It doesn't matter how you play, you're just going to see a blur. Okay. And then, but the way our rink is, they have these benches for parents right next to the glass behind the goalie. And he had this is when I got excited about his hockey career. Okay. He got the puck, he came down and he tried to do a wraparound and the goalie threw him back. Okay. And then he tried to do a wraparound again and the goalie knocked him down. And then late in the game, we're like tied and he's got the puck again and he's going to go for another wraparound. And he went around and he stopped behind the net and came back, you know? Right. And the net was wide open because the goalie's waiting for him. It was an easy goal. And it was like so great because he uses his brain, right? You know? And I always explain to him, like, that's exactly how hockey is. Like when most goals that when you score them, you're scoring on an empty net. And if you've done your work right, the net is empty. The shot doesn't matter. The shot's just finishing a play. The play is what you do through passing or whatever to get the puck, to get the goalie out of the way. And I think that was a moment that was like a really big moment, you know. And one other, which is they played this tournament in Lake Placid when he was like a squirt, and they played in the bronze medal game and lost, and they were really long in the locker room. And I went in there and all the kids were weeping like it was like a real Olympic loss, you know. Right. And it was just something so sad but so cool about it that they cared that much about it, you know, as a team. Yeah, that it made me really happy.
Yeah, it's right. I mean, those are, I think, the most, you know, it's not necessarily the winning the championship and the, you know, the things that you think are going to be the great, you know, the great moments. It can be them losing. And it's funny how easily after they're devastated, they can just be like, oh, wait, we're getting burgers.
Right. Well, they forget very quickly, but while they experience it, it's intense and it's real. And then it goes away very quickly too. And that's another good reason for the 24-hour rule, which is all this stuff just evaporates and what remains is the good stuff, really.
Right, right. No, it's what's the most ridiculous thing you've seen occur in a rink or on a rink?
Well, there are many, many ridiculous things, but once we were playing in the state tournament and like their parents on the other side were yelling at our kids, like as if they were pro players,
Right.
yelling mean things at them. And one of our parents, a guy who is, I think he's like a physicist from MIT who works at Yale. I mean, he's like a really very smart, accomplished person. Turns to these guys and he goes, why don't you talk to your kids and we'll talk to our kids? And it turned into a big shouting fight. And this guy was going out into the parking lot to fight this other guy. And I stopped him like, what the hell are you doing? He's like, that guy, but I'm like, listen, what's going to happen here? What's the best case scenario? The best case scenario is you go out and you beat this person up and you go to jail. That's probably not what's going to happen. And that was like an example of me of a brilliant man forgetting where he was in his life and what he was doing.
Well, there's, I think we might have talked about this before, but there's this way in which you forget that people are actually human beings.
Yeah.
Right. And like refs would be a good example, where they become, this object of all your ire and people are screaming at, and they're, making $40 an hour.
Right.
And I was at a game where two guys who were both respected attorneys were so out of control that the ref stopped the game and said, I'm throwing both of you out of the rink. And they said, no, we're not leaving. And I was like, they're the most reasonable, like well-educated guys. And you just sit there and you're like, dudes.
You have to learn your
How did we
skills
get here?
from grade school, which is go to the side of the parking lot, close your eyes and count backwards from 10,
Right. Which,
And well, I don't know if I told you this when we talked before, and this isn't about youth hockey, but this is about my own adult hockey career, this was my favorite ref thing that ever happened, which is we were playing in New York in the Sky Rink in Chelsea Piers. And this guy, I played for the Manhattan DA's office team. We were called Blind Justice. My brother was, the captain of the team.
right.
And we had this guy, Steve Brostoff, who was a prosecutor and was a bit of a hothead. He's like 40 years old. And he got called for some penalty and he had committed a penalty. It wasn't like he cross-checked somebody or something. And they sent him to the penalty box and he's in the penalty box. He takes off his helmet and he's screaming at the ref, screaming at him. It's like 1 a.m, And he finally says, you're a disgrace, ref. You're a disgrace to that uniform. And the ref skates over and says, it's 1 a.m. and I'm reffing you people for minimum wage. I'm a disgrace, all right, but it has nothing to do with this uniform. And we all felt so bad for him, And even Brostoff's like, I'm so sorry. I don't know what I was thinking of.
It's one thing is that I'm sure there's a small subsection of parents who are not affected at one point or another this way, but it's like, it's very equalizing because we all have at least one, if not several moments of absolute insanity.
Well, and also what you do is at the best you can do, like people ask me like, well, now that you've written this book, have you gotten it under control? You cannot, it's like, I call it the hockey cortex. It's a part of your brain you're unaware of, but if you have it, it lights up and you can't control it. You cannot not feel it. But what you do is you learn coping techniques. You can just control your own behavior. One is don't go to the games or hang out outside. But when I now go to a game and I look at the stands where the parents are sitting, I can spot all the coping techniques. Some people are drinking. Some people have clearly taken a Valium. Some, they're completely dazed and relaxed. Some people, we have a guy that would keep very meticulous box score, like he's, at a Cubs game in the 70s, and he's doing it because he's got to do something so he isn't screaming. There's the parents, right. We talked about this, who always stand alone because they know that a stream of expletives are going to be coming out of their mouths and they don't want anyone else to hear it. Right. And then there's people like you, the goalie parent, who always stands right behind the goalie, and everybody knows, like when a pitcher is pitching a no-hitter, you can't talk to him in baseball. Right. Dude, you do not talk to the goalie's parent during the game. If you talk to the goalie's parent and something bad happens to you, that's on you. That's your fault. Just don't talk to the goalie's parent.
Right. It's a very delicate thing being the goalie parent and dealing with the goalie parent.
Right.
I realized that if I stood near the net for any more years, I was going to be institutionalized, and I just had.
But I just remember watching goalie's parents standing kind of right in a kid's blind spot, and that drove me nuts. Like he was just barely. I'm sure the kid could barely see him in his peripheral vision,
Right.
And the dad was yelling at him and giving him hand signals. It's like, it's like gypsy, like with stage parents, like to play gypsy.
Right.
If you want to understand human nature and humans under pressure about things that truly are not important,
right,
then it's great to go to a hockey rink and not watch the ice, but watch the stands. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's like a sitcom with stock characters, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you have one of everything on every team. It's like you're like, oh, you're that guy.
Right.
Oh, you're the guy who who bangs on the glass when this happens. You're like, okay, now I know that.
And you can't, and it's interesting, and it's always like when people start trying to talk to you when your kid is out there, and then you have the people that are actually using their phones to time their kids' shifts.
So, well, let me ask you one last question. What does your son think about you writing a book about this? Since he's a character, it's his team.
Kids, I have a general philosophy that I had years before this book, which is kids have this huge advantage, which is they're stupid and they don't really know what's going on.
Sure.
I mean, he knows I'm writing the book. He's listened to huge chunks of the book on audio. And he thinks it's kind of cool. It doesn't really affect him. He doesn't really think about it. And that's the great thing about him with hockey, which is he just loves to play hockey. So we had this thing I wrote about in the book where I got pissed off because I thought he got shafted and put to the different line he shouldn't have been on. And I kind of had a whole thing with the coach and then with the other parents. And then I was upset. And we get in the car and he's just like eating Mike and Ike's and whistling a Beatles song. And I'm like, why am I mad? Why am I mad and you're not? I just suddenly realized, I said, don't you care about this? And he goes, not really. I'm like, why don't you care? And he's like, I don't care where they put me. It's still hockey wherever they put me. And that's it. It's like, there's no bad hockey. As long as I'm playing hockey, I really don't care,
Right.
And it's all me. It's all me. So that's why I realize I'm the problem because he doesn't care and I care. And that's just not right. So basically if you leave the kids alone, they mostly would do all right by themselves, basically. And the kids know who the good players are and who they want to play with and all that stuff. And when the parents get too involved, they kind of mess up the system. The teams aren't right. And when the teams aren't right, it's not fun because you want to play with kids you can play with. Right. So if you're on a team that's above your level, that might make you parent feel good or the kid even feel good, but it's not fun because you're gonna be left behind on the plays. And if you're at a team that you're above that level, that's not going to be fun because you're not going to be able to play your top, Right. So it's an art getting these teams right. But the whole tryout system, it doesn't really work exactly like it's supposed to because the only people that know are the coaches and the coaches don't have enough of a say. That's how I feel about it.
Well, I said that was the last, but let me ask you one last thing. If you were going to change, if you were in charge of all youth hockey, what would you change? What would you make different to make?
Well, here's what I do is here we play in this kind of, I don't know, it's tier 2 league when it's going right. And they travel all over the area. And there's a big problem with keeping kids in these programs. They leave. So they get very competitive. They move the tryouts early and earlier because they want to lock the kids into these contracts. It's crazy, right? So, and they don't feel any loyalty ultimately to these programs because the programs don't display any loyalty to the kids mostly. I mean, it's like a two-way street. So what I would do, and I think would be fun, is first of all, we spend so much time driving when we could be playing hockey. It's a much better use of their time. Instead of driving 6 hours, playing 2 or 3 hockey games. So we have so many hockey rinks right around here where I'm in Connecticut. There's like 5 or 6 very good programs right around us. I would make like an NFC Central type, NFC North division where we play just, instead of playing these random teams all over the area, play the same 5 teams 15 times each, which would build this real rivalry, which would create a loyalty to the program. Kids wouldn't leave. And then I would do my best, regardless of how an individual tryout period went, unless there's some reason, to keep the teams together that want to stay together as much as possible, and let those kids age together. And don't use the A team and the double A team or whatever it is just as a skill, but as this is the team moving through the system, and it has to do with the age, which is when we would play, there was an A team. It didn't mean you weren't a good player. It meant you were the younger, because it was 2 grades together,
Right.
you know. So the younger the 2 would be A, and then the second year, it was like going from junior to senior. Second year was double A with the occasional phenomenal kid who would play up, and the kid who needs more work play down. And I think that that's what I would do, you know. And then as far as the tryouts go, I would basically do basic tryouts, but let the coaches of the whole system sit down and make a decision without the parents present, even if those parents are on a board or whatever. No
Right.
parents present, just the coaches deciding. That's basically how I would do it.
Yeah. I would have to say I agree with absolutely all of that.
Yeah.
Well, Jenny, is it time for questions?
Yeah, let's go ahead and get a couple of questions in there. Thanks for this conversation, guys. So we've got Alex, who's in Wisconsin, asked if the kids in Connecticut are playing this season.
Well, actually, my son doesn't play weird. I'm talking about how there's no loyalty to the programs. He doesn't play in Connecticut right now. He plays in New York. We're on the border of New York. He plays in New York. And so in Connecticut, they started out like a normal season, and then they just stopped playing completely. And because of COVID, and there's all kinds of shenanigans and stuff. I don't really understand what's going on because I'm not involved in Connecticut, but I've heard about it. And they're supposed to start up again at the end of this month, I think. In New York, they're still playing, but they're not playing games. We're not playing games. We're playing scrimmages within the organization and practices, which is actually kind of weirdly good because, you know, to them a scrimmage is like a game. They can't tell the difference. There's no ranking or any of that. But because they're playing a lot of hockey because the teams are playing internally against each other. So you're basically on the ice the whole entire time. So I know they miss the traveling and they miss the hotels and they miss the rankings and all that, but actually it's for development, it's probably turned out to be an okay season. That makes sense.
Alex also asked if you have a better parent-coach situation this season.
Yes. This season's great. Now, partly because I don't want to go in the rink because I'm afraid of getting COVID, you know, but basically, you know, what you need is a coach that takes control and knows what they're doing and has a plan. And sometimes you have these coaches in these organizations. It's not that they have parent coaches. It's that they have one pro coach, call him a pro coach. It's a kid who's working for a little bit of money, usually someone in their 20s, and then 2 parents who are supposed to sit on the bench and just help. That's all they're supposed to do. But they have their opinions and they have their kids. And it's not like they think their kid's bad and they're trying to get their kid to play more. They think their kid is the best. But everybody thinks their kid is the best. That's how it works. So and if they wind up, you know, taking over the team, which is winding what happens, then you get in this whole weird thing. So this year we have these coaches who played hockey, good hockey players, and they have a real plan and they've done an amazing job. Especially considering the COVID, because they've had to juggle that too.
It's good to hear. It's good to hear. Have the kids have something to do right now other than sit at home.
Yeah, no,
right?
it's like, and it is really
Driving each other
good.
crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Brian says, as a parent of a first-year squirt, I feel like this book is a microcosm of my hockey parent experience, loving it so far. Not sure if the story goes into the pandemic. If not, what has this season been like as a second-year Pee-wee?
Well, no, he's now actually a bantam. Well, one thing that's unusual is normally as a bantam, that's when you'd start checking. And I assume that a lot of kids probably quit. So at some point in bantam year, like they get hurt and they get knocked out and they don't want any of it. I always think it's such a joke that you let them play until bantam year and then you tell them about checking, because it's like, it would be like living until you're 15 and then saying, oh, we forgot to tell you one thing about life. You're going to die at some point, you know? It's like leaving out something very important. And I think a lot of kids probably bail out at that point, but because of COVID, there's no checking this year because they don't want them physically, you know, running into each other like that. So now maybe that's good because maybe he'll grow, and because, you know, you get this weird thing where you get kids that are like grown men and then kids that are kids. So, but like I said, it's been another reason it's been good is because they're not so focused on winning. See, there's this tension built into youth hockey, which is winning versus development. And a lot of the coaches want to win and the programs want them to win. So they wind up sort of letting some players languish and not develop because they want to win. And this year, because there's no winning, they're much more free. So I know that my son always wanted to play defense. But they always wanted to play offense because he'd score. And they never let him play defense. And this year they're letting him play defense. And he loves it. And I think that's going to be really good for his hockey game because he's got to develop all these different skills, which are totally new to him. Like, how do you stop somebody one-on-one? You know, how do you control the puck and just skating backwards with the puck and making passes. And so weirdly, it's been, like I said, it's kind of a weirdly good season in a way.
Not so much a question, but a fun story from Patty, who says, people thought my husband and I were divorced because we never sat together at the games.
Yeah.
I get that. And then a question from Katie. Why do you think, and this is a great question, why do you think there's such a difference between how our parents handled sports and how our generation parents athletes?
I think because all these things, it just goes hand in hand with people wearing, sweat clothes to work and stuff. I mean, all these things that didn't seem that important. They just had a different set of priorities, probably because the country was in a different place. And they now seem important. Like, what team your kid makes seems important and you want to control it. It isn't important. Some of these people think their kid's going to get into a better college because of hockey or because of some other sport, I'm always like, dude, take up fencing then. You're in the wrong sport. If college is what you're interested in, this is too competitive of a sport. You need to find a niche. Like, I think they're looking for badminton players at British schools, maybe that. So, I don't know. It's like I just think that our parents were too focused on their lives and their families, and everything was a little more rigid and it seemed less important. And part of that is because, and this is the depressing thing, there's a feeling that things are right now, like things are shrinking and there's less of everything for everybody. And it's like a zero-sum game. And if somebody else gets it, I don't. If some other kid makes it, my kid won't. And I don't want that kid to get better because then my kid's going to suffer. There's just some of that. And I see it, my older son's applying to college and I see it. There's so much stress that if you don't go to the right college, then you won't have a good life. It's sick. And I was talking to Josh about this before, which is, I remember graduating from New Trier in 1986. Okay, if you went to Harvard or Yale, maybe that'd make a difference in your life, I guess. But beyond that, never occurred to me then that if you went to University of Michigan or University of Illinois or Michigan State or University of Wisconsin, your life was in some way going to become different or good or bad. It just didn't matter that much. Right. And now everything seems like it matters so much, and hockey's part of that.
All right. Then Rex asked, while most of your books are personal, like Affect the Cubs, the Bears, was this book harder to write? Because although it was about being a hockey parent, it is also about Micah.
It's never hard to write so much. I mean, it's hard to write, but it's like, Sweet and Low is a book about my mother getting disinherited and my uncle getting investigated by the FBI. That was harder to write because this is basically fun and good with all the conflict. What was hard to write is to keep your own kid small enough portion of the book that it just didn't seem like some guy telling you about his kid's hockey. You wanted it to be a real book where he was just in basically the lens, but kind of an incidental character, and it just didn't become me talking about him. So it was always making his role in it smaller. And I read this story that was influential to me, inspiring, a long time ago, and I always thought of it. There was this, Stephen King wrote a story that was published in the New Yorker about a nonfiction story about his son's Little League baseball team in Maine. And the way he wrote about it, almost in the third person, even though he was a parent coach on that team, showed me that it can be done, So that was the hard thing. It wasn't the emotional thing. It was getting the balance right.
Is your hockey bond with Micah a challenge with your other sons?
Yes. I think that there's deep burning resentment that I'm going to pay for later in many years of therapy, probably. But what are you going to do?
I don't know if you can avoid that with anything with your
No.
Right? Like, it's just, there's always something.
Yeah.
All right. So then as somebody who grew up and played in the Midwest and now have experience with your son playing the East, are there any discernible differences in the two, like the hockey style or the parents or even just the rinks?
Well, so I grew up in a different time, so it's hard to know for sure, but I think many fewer people played hockey when I was growing up. Now, I believed when I was growing up that the best hockey played in America was played in Chicago. I just was dead certain. And when we played tournaments, we used to go to Canada and play tournaments, and that was who we saw as our competition. And we go to Can-Am Hockey Camp, which was in Canada. So, but then I came here and I realized, oh, the hockey here is serious, man. It's because what I didn't really figure, and what's interesting here is they have all these prep schools, and the really good kids get recruited by these prep schools, and we play all our games in the prep schools. And it's a little weird because it's a little bit like going back to an older, like when you go to some of these schools, trying to remember some, like, I don't know, Taft or something, but some of these you're playing in rinks that were built like in 1905, and they have all around the rink the pictures of the teams, the kids playing with like basically mattresses tied to their legs as pads. I mean, it's like it's like the dead ball era in baseball. So there is more. That's what surprised me here, and it has to do with the prep schools, not with the place, which is the amount of tradition to it, and the age of the game, and it's very different than the Deerfield Bubbles playing in the Choate ice rink. And then another thing is, and this might be true in Chicago too now, but a lot of NHL players, I think because the NHL office is in New York, and there's 3 teams in the New York area, a lot of them settle around here. So they're hockey parents. So you run into them. One of the funny stories I have is what's his name? Martin St. Louis, right? Who was a Hall of Fame hockey player. He was a coach in Greenwich, and a kid on that team told me that the parent didn't know who he was and came in and started screaming at him after a game that he didn't know what the hell he was doing and didn't know anything about hockey. Could you imagine when somebody later told him, dude, that's Martin St. Louis. He's in the NFL Hall of Fame. He's won Stanley Cup, And I had the great experience where when I was my older son's coach, I wrote about in the book, all the parents were walking around the rink and they came back freaked out. And I'm like, what happened? They're like, the other team is coached by Mark Messier, So that's kind of the thing you see around here. There are these guys floating around that like make us all feel like idiots for sharing an opinion out loud.
We've been fortunate to have a couple of former Blackhawks at the bookstore to do signings in before times, but it's really cool to see the kid. But the way it's a multi-generational sport, as you were saying, that the kids that come out to see Chris Chelios and Eddie Olczyk, that know who they are, even though those guys haven't played in their lifetime, but their parents sure as heck knew who they were, and they're following their post careers now as well.
And also you sort of think, oh, geez, if I was Mark Messier, man, I wouldn't be at a rink at 9 a.m. on a Sunday night in West Hartford, Connecticut, watching my sports son play in a pretty ugly hockey game. I'd be like in the Bahamas or something, But I guess that's how much they love hockey.
Right. But you actually would be. I mean, Eddie Olczyk is, and Josh should listen to local games. I mean, he's, he calls all the games now, and he's still.
Yeah, no, I hear him all the time. He's
a great guy too.
He played for the Rangers, I think, at the end of his career, if I remember.
Yeah, I think so.
He played for a ton of teams. Yeah.
We still claim him as Chicago, though. He's ours.
I mean, the players from here are people who mostly went through the prep schools, like Jonathan Quick, the goalie, and I forget their name, the captain of, anyway, I'll think of it in a second. There's a kid who, see, this is what happens after you turn 50, you lose your memory. But
all right. Well, I think we've gotten through all the questions here in the chat. Unless anybody else has another one you want to jump in there, please put that in there. But Josh, I want to ask you before we wrap up here, what are you working on next?
I'm working on a couple of TV projects right now. And nothing which is like imminently going to be on, but a couple of different TV things, and one of which is like a documentary series about the 70s, and about not like the serious stuff that happened in the 70s, but like about like an entire episode about Fantasy Island, or an entire episode about some all the ridiculous documentaries about the ridiculousness of the 70s. So I'm
Do you
working.
remember the Saturday night where Lonnie Anderson went from the Love Boat to Fantasy Island? One of the greatest TV spectacles of my entire life.
Right, or when when Andy Warhol was on the Love Boat, which is like my favorite.
I don't think I remember. I'm sure I didn't know who he was when I was a kid, but I knew who Lonnie Anderson was.
Right, but yeah. So, but I'm working on like several different TV projects and then one book project that hopefully I will know more about soon. So
right, good. Well,
thank you for asking.
And Rich, what's next for you? Which sport haven't you covered?
There's only one left: it's basketball or lacrosse. I mean, not lacrosse. Sorry, the fastest sport in the world, highlight. So I think I'm going to write a series of connected novels about highlight.
Okay, can't wait. You heard it here first. The next bestseller guy. Any other book projects yet?
No, I've just been working on. There was a really horrible sort of murder disappearance here in Connecticut. Of this, I wrote about it in this magazine called Airmail, which is Graydon Carter's magazine. It's 6-part. I wrote it. I wanted to write it like in cold blood, like Truman Capote did. I wanted to write it in chapters. And it was like the hardest thing I ever did because I had to report and write one a week. And a lot of people were reading them. And if I messed up, and then when I was halfway through, somebody said, "You're not doing these in like real time, are you? You've written them all in advance." I'm like, "No, I'm doing them in real time." He's like, "Nobody does that." And then it's like, "Oh my God, what have I done?"
They were great.
Talk to somebody first. What?
I read them. They were terrific.
Yeah, but I didn't realize people don't do them. Of course, it would make so much more sense. Like when you find out that on the cooking shows, they didn't really make that stuff during the show. They'd made it before and then showed it on the show.
It blows up your whole experience of watching it by doing that, right?
Yeah. Big mistake.
Well, we are excited to see what else you will be coming out with on your writing in the future too. And I think that's it. I did drop a link in the chat. If you don't yet have your hands on a signed copy of the book, please order one there and we'll get that out to you. Thanks to Rich, we do have some signed book plates, so we'll get those signed books to you out the door as soon as we can. Did you guys have anything else you wanted to wrap up with?
Just great. It's actually great just spending time with Josh, who I haven't gotten to see in a while in person. So this is fun just to hang out with Josh.
Same here. Absolutely.
Awesome.
So if you want to have us just talk to each other anytime, we're around.
Excellent. If our programming gets a little light, I'll just tell you guys up here.
You guys run on authors, we're here.
Yeah. Well, thank you both. And thank you to everyone for being with us tonight. We really appreciate your time. If you did already order a book, we'll get that out to you as soon as we can and let you know via email when they're ready to be picked up or when we're shipping that to you. So thanks, everybody. Be safe out there. Wear your mask, wash your hands, and happy reading.
Thank you. See ya.
All right. Have a good night. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.